Welcome everyone to This Week in Svelte, your weekly source of news from Svelte. I am Paolo Ricciuti, I am your host, and today joining me there is two other ambassadors, which are Enrico and I can never remember, I can never say your name, right? Khromov? Did I say it right?
My name is Stanislav. Is my name.
Stanislav, yeah, I mean.
And Enrico's here, hello.
So let's dive right in, if I can present. This is obviously like the dark mode this week in Svelte. The agenda is the usual. We have changelogs. This week we have changelogs for both Svelte and SvelteKit. We have some quick fact and announcement. We have a community showcase and some discussion and maybe some Q&A. We will see. So let's start with the juicy part, the changelog, and let's go over and let's go see. And I've opened the wrong changelog but we can quickly go there. So the changelog for yes, is this zoomed in enough?
Great.
Okay, so this is the changelog for Svelte 4.2.2. We have a fix, support camel case properties on custom element. Oh, apparently this was not supported. Add missing plain text only value to content editable type. Ooh, this is interesting. And for those who does not know, content editable, it's a very cool like attribute that you can apply on everything, like a div or everything else, and literally allow you to edit the content of that thing, basically. So content editable is what probably is used to make like rich text format editors and something like this. There are some chore, obviously, update magic string to 0.3.30.4 and ignore trading comments when comparing nodes. I don't know, do you have more insight on this, Enrico?
Trailing comments when comparing nodes. That sounds like a low-level compiler fix, but we can take a look at the pull request.
Yeah,
As a side
absolutely.
note, content editable kind of scares me. Isn't that like bottom of the iceberg front-end development? Really difficult stuff?
Absolutely, yes. Like there's so much thing that can go wrong with content editable. But yeah, I mean, fortunately enough, we have other smart people that are putting all of these together for us by providing us with components for rich text editor.
Indeed. So let's see issue 9088. What is being patched?
Which is also still open. Adding a comment changed the semantic of code significantly, as well as a related potential reactivity bug. Ooh, that's a lot of stuff. Do we have a
Does this
REPL?
imply a code comment changes the built code?
Look in some component of Svelte for explanation. So gets triggered on button click even though names never change.
Oh, wow. So on line 18, apparently adding a comment will break something.
Add a comment to the side of the below line. Wow. That's really, really strange stuff. Very interesting. I bet like probably they will be on this soon. Even though like with the Svelte 5 release, probably this will go away by either way. But I mean, who cares? Who knows how much we have to wait?
It's a really well-made reproduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is the reproduction that everyone should make when producing an issue, because this really helps maintainers to understand your problem. And obviously, if they understand it, they can fix it. They can fix it quickly. Let's move to
AB asks, is this about the Svelte website? Not particularly. This is the Svelte compiler in general, and the REPL demonstrates the problem.
Yes, exactly. So let's move to SvelteKit 1.26.0. So we have a minor change, which is infer root parameter type from mature guard check if applicable. I think I saw a similar PR before. Like this probably allows you to have a param matcher that it's run before all root parameters have type string. The type is incorrect, but often broader than it needs to be. Oh, this is very cool. Like if you have a param matcher that it's also like a TypeScript guard type, you will actually get typed parameters. This is very, very cool. Like this, my param here, it's actually of type A or B because this param matcher is a type guard for TypeScript. So after running this matcher, SvelteKit knows that these params will be of type A or B. Very, very cool. I would probably use this because it's so much cooler. Like I like it very much. I don't know if you like this, but if you are a TypeScript user, you will probably like this. And then a bunch of patch changes, like fix the basic MIME type handling for per ending page in preview. Some chore following what I can never remember how to pronounce this. Fetch spec for handling redirect loops. Oh, yeah, this is handling redirect, especially with loops. It's a mess. So I am glad they fixed this. Use window.fetchInload function to allow libraries to patch it. Okay, this is interesting because I mean, patching global fetch is not something that you should advise for, but obviously there are a lot of libraries out there that make these. So
Oh, I recognize this user. They help maintain Sentry, and Sentry does a lot of overtaking of standard functions for the sake of logging errors. And I can see why they requested this. And Svelte tries not to get in the way of escape hatches, so it makes sense that this was implemented based on the philosophies of Svelte and web standards. So I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like actually, Kit patches the global fetches, but I mean it's not really a patch. But I mean, I get it why they want this at Sentry. So I mean it's cool that we can use Sentry. I think like they definitely did their research before doing this, so I think it's fine.
Yeah, it makes sense because if you're doing like security auditing, you tend to do a lot of overtaking of standard prototypes. And on a related note, if some of you may have seen an NPM audit for Undici, so that was patched in SvelteKit 1.26.0. So it's good to have 0 vulnerabilities in your code bases. Get upgraded.
Yeah, cool. It's when you install a fresh project, always like having a 0 vulnerability is always something that, I mean, it's a bit exciting, even though like the audit is flawed by design, but I mean, it's fine either way. Okay, let's move to quick fact and announcements. So let's start with as a quick fact that you can use overrides in package.json to manually override a module resolution. And Enrico, I think like you had these, like you proposed this quick fact. So do you have more insight on this?
It was actually inspired by Stanislav, who's with us today. So in package.json, if you can open up an example, there is a key value pair called overrides. So closely related to the recent Undici patch. If you want to override,
can I open a random?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything, yeah. So in any package.json, you have dependencies, you have dev dependencies, and sometimes to circumvent auditing issues, you may be aware of the correct version of a sub-module or a deep module you wish to patch. So by adding a key value pair overrides, you can add it right above dev dependencies, for example. Yes. You can set overrides, and then you can specify the packages you wish to override along with a version pattern matcher, such as Undici as your key, and then the version can be some patched version of Undici. That way, when you do npm install, or probably pnpm install as well, it'll follow that. Any additional thoughts, Stanislav?
No, just a convenient way to do it. Maybe the point of these security warnings is a good discussion topic at some point, like you mentioned, Pablo.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, I think, like, because someone might say, why bothering with these when you can just pin it as a dev dependency? This means that, correct me if I'm wrong, this means that every package will use this version, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what will happen if a package specifically declines or sets a version range for a version.
Yes.
It might I guess it might override it in that case as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure like if it's strict or loose. I believe it's strict, where even if it's outside of the range of a subdependency, it may override it strictly. But I have to test it to make sure.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. Let's move to another quick fact, because this was pretty quick and pretty fact. And this is the devlog, I don't know how, 3 days ago on the Svelte Society YouTube channel, which you may see this very video on. Like the three main maintainers that are working on Svelte 5 actually went with Kevin, which is the main mind behind Svelte Society, like is the factotum of Svelte Society. And they actually talked about Svelte 5, the future of Svelte, how they are handling Svelte, the release of Svelte 5. So it's a very, very interesting topic, and you may, it's in the description, and now if you are live on Discord, in the chat for your viewing pleasure. Enrico already shared this. Let's go ahead and
I have some highlights for that video in case anyone doesn't want to watch it but wants to know like some takeaways. One of them is runes went over 50 plus iterations. So if you're on Reddit or something and you're seeing all the different alternative ideas, it's super likely that the maintainers have already come up with it and perhaps disposed it due to some major conflict or major compromise. A second interesting fact is Simon seems to be an expert red team player, because what all the maintainers have been doing is they've been split up into two teams, like red versus blue. And a blue team would, for example, come up with a proposal and the red team would scrutinize it. And it turns out Simon is an expert scrutinizer. So you should have Simon on your side when coming up with new ideas. And lastly, they are eagerly working on releasing an NPM package for you. So sit tight and hang on. There's going to be a beta pre-release soon enough for you all to test in your projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, I don't know if this is something that gets asked a lot, so it's worth mentioning. I will actually show you the docs, because there was recently a new addition to the FAQ. And this is something that gets asked a lot, or why we can't keep the old syntax. And this is like, give it a read if you have this very question, because this is explaining why, not only why you cannot use the $: which was already mentioned in a previous episode of This Week in Svelte, but now they added also why they can't keep with let, which is a very sweet syntax, but unfortunately, like with Svelte 5, it doesn't work. So let's like give it a read if you are interested. Let's now move to our community showcase, which is like hosted by none other than Stanislav. So I don't know if you want to share your screen. I will hide mine, and so that you can...
Yeah, thanks, Paolo. I'd love to share it. Great. The share screen button was grayed out, but now it came back.
Yeah, because unfortunately Discord disallow multiple people for streaming their screen.
All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So I'll get right into it. This is a short showcase of what I call dynamic component loading in SvelteKit. But before we talk about how to solve it, let's talk a little bit about the problem that you might have or you might not have in your project. So I work at a media house. So our main product is this kind of like news article sites. So this is an example of a news article that we have. And one thing you notice is, of course, it has like some typical components, like a header, a sidebar. But then we look a little bit closer and we look at the article content itself. And we can tell that it actually consists of many different things. You have like some ad, you have a title, a byline for the author, like preamble, fact box, video, and so on and so forth. So we have a bunch of different components on this site. And we have an underlying CMS that powers it. And so kind of what you get out from the CMS is something like along these lines. So you have an array of objects. Each object specifies what type of object it is. Is it a heading? Is it text? They can be arbitrarily, shuffled around. So not all articles have to have a heading at the top, for example. So how would we do something? How would we render something like this in Svelte? So it would look maybe something like this. So what are we doing? We're getting the data. We're importing like all of the possible components that we can have on our site. We have a little map there, and the map is just to say that is to be able to fetch the correct type of component. And then we have an each loop at the bottom where we loop over all the components. And for each component, we render it with Svelte component. So this way, if you haven't tried it, this is a really simple way to render dynamic content. It's really powerful. But there is one tiny little problem with this approach, and that is that we have to import all of the possible components. And maybe for most sites, it's not a really big problem, but for some of our sites, it's actually a huge problem because we have sometimes hundreds of components. So imagine you're going to a news site and you want to read an article, but you have to load in 100 or 200 different types of components, every single component that can ever be on the website. And that's a big problem because the bundle size becomes really, really chunky. So what we want to do is we actually want to render only the components that are used on a specific page. So we can do this with something called bundle splitting. And as we saw a comment that somebody can't hear me. I hope that most people can hear me at least. Yeah, so bundle splitting. And what is bundle splitting? It's a feature in Vite where you can, as you see here in this example, you can import files dynamically from a folder. And so we can actually combine this with Svelte and with SvelteKit and its loading hierarchy to be able to load just the components that we need. So if you look at it as a graph of how the data flows, so we have like the CMS at the top. So we get all of the component data from the CMS, just as in that example that I showed. We get it in page.server, and then we pass the data just as it is from page.server to page. And if you're familiar with the load functions in SvelteKit, the page function actually runs in the browser as well as on the server. But we're really interested in it because it runs in the browser in this case. So what we can do is in the page.js function, the universal one, we can actually import each component that we are using on this particular page and pass it in the same type of way that we did in our previous example, where we will have like an import map where we have like the name of the component and then its actual import. And then we pass that all to page.svelte and render it out. And this, I understand this is a little bit complicated, so I have a little demo just to show you kind of what that actually does on your site. So I have this demo that I prepared. There's a GitHub repo that shows off how to do this. And we're just going to have a look and see how it will work. So we have here like a basic news site, you can say, where we have 2 articles. So we have one article that's going to have 3 dynamically loaded components, I think a title, a text, and an image. And then we have one article that has just 1 dynamically loaded component. So if I click this one article that has only 1 loaded component, see here, just a second. Here we go. So I went to the article, and you saw here we got like some JavaScript files that is like part of Svelte and the new page that we're going to. But you saw this component, text something.js. This is the actual component that renders this line of text. And now if we go back and we kind of like reset everything, the cache is disabled, and then we load this component with this article with 3 different components. So we have a heading, a text, and an image. And here you can see that we loaded each of these separately. And that means what you saw in the previous article was where we didn't have a heading component, we didn't have to load it. And this means, of course, that we can send less JavaScript to the user. And that is great because it's quicker. And another great feature about this is that this actually works with server-side rendering. So we don't have to compromise anything from an SEO perspective, because that's very typical if you stream components in or something like that. It might not always work with server-side rendering, but this actually works. And so finally, I just wanted to show the actual code, and we can compare it a little bit to the simplified example that we were looking at before. So we'll start in the page.server. And here we have the article content. This is kind of like what you would imagine we would fetch from a CMS. So it's basically like an array with components. And these are going to be sent over to page.ts or JS, the universal load function. And here's where we're going to do a little bit of magic. So we need to figure out which components we actually want to load for this particular page. So what we're going to do here on this line is we're going to go through each of the components in the article, and then we're going to fill up this array called components to load. So this array is going to contain like an array of the types of components. So it's going to say, in the example of this article, it's going to say title, text, and heading, because we want all 3 of them. And then here, a little bit further down, we're going to go ahead and for each component that we actually need to load, first we normalize it, so there's only 1 of each instance. And then for each component, we're just going to go ahead and load that using this dynamic import feature, which you can see up here. So we import it by its name, and then this components, components, and then in the name of the components is going to be a components title, components text. And we're going to have the actual imports. And then we're going to return those together with the article data. And finally, once we're ready to actually like render this on the front end, we're going to go ahead and going to get both the article data and the import map of all of the possible components. And then we're going to render over all the components. And for each component, just as we did in the simplified example, we are going to pass on like the type of component and its data. And as you see here, is if you compare it to the first example, we didn't have to import all of the possible components to be able to do this. Yeah, and that's it. That's the whole thing. And I'm sure we will include links to this repo. And if you have this problem and you want to talk about it, just reach out. Yeah, that's it.
Very cool. Everybody, give some words of appreciation to Khromov for presenting, and a clapping emoji if you have one. Thank you for that. I think we have a question already. Anthropic asks, can we leverage promise.all in your for loop in your page.ts file?
Yes, absolutely. This was just a kind of super quick exploration that we did for an upcoming project. You can definitely use promise all, because now it's kind of bad, right? Because it loads one component at a time sequentially, but you really want to use promise all.
Cool. And I'm sure everyone in the chat looks forward to sharing those repos so that we can all take a look later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anyone else have questions?
I just want to say, like, I saw a comment on your repository about the fact that $lib doesn't work with dynamic import. I think, like, I saw a plugin for SvelteKit, for Vite, to actually allow you to use path aliases. But I mean, yeah, unfortunately with normal Vite, dynamic imports doesn't work with the path aliases unless you have a plugin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you send me a link to a plugin, I'd be happy to add it to the repo. That would be cool to get working.
Yeah, I will definitely send you a plugin for that. Okay, so let's move on. This week in discussion. So let's move to
Don't forget to share.
Oh, yeah.
And don't forget to zoom in.
Luckily, there is Enrico that keeps me on check. Can you see my screen?
Ready.
Okay, so let's move to this week in discussion, where like the discussion that we want to have is if someone write content for their website using Markdown, if you have any insight on like if you like it, if you don't like it, if you prefer other approaches. Personally,
yeah,
I use Markdown for my blog, and I also use Markdown, for example, for the documentation of SvelteLab. So for personal project, I think Markdown can make sense for content heavy websites. I've seen some, how can I say, someone that is not that much into Markdown because it's not that much easier than HTML. I personally kind of disagree, like even just for the fact that going to the next line with \n add a new paragraph, which actually will go to the next line, is a time saver. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I brought up this topic mostly because I was eager to ask Stanislav here with us, who does a lot of content-heavy sites. I was curious what your take is about using Markdown. Like, does it have narrow use cases, or do you think it's got more broad use cases when it comes to website content management?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to talk about it in like ultimates. It really depends, and people are building also so many different sites with Svelte. Like you mentioned, Pablo, like maybe you're doing, you're really heavy into documentation and those type of sites, and Markdown is really useful for that because you can have a preview in GitHub or something like that. But for kind of like for journalism and things like that I'm more familiar with, it's not super common. I think it's a little bit it's tough for journalists to write Markdown, and maybe it's too close to HTML and too abstract, and also stuff like inserting images is kind of like awkward. You know, like you want a GUI kind of for that, and there are tools like that, of course, that simplify that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thomas is commenting on that. Like, I'm assuming you prefer a headless CMS or like a block-based content editor. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have a custom CMS where I work, and it spits out the data kind of like how I described it, with in JSON, like in a headless fashion, and we also do styling in a special way. But so that's also like how do you? That's I think a really good use case actually for Markdown is because it's quite easy to parse it into something for basic styling like bold and cursive and stuff like that.
Yeah, also there is
your own format.
There's a whole lot of like another discussion about enhanced Markdown. For example, MDX. For Svelte, we have MD-Svex, which is one of the projects of Penguin, which is one of the maintainers of Svelte. And I think like there's also like I use MD-Svex actually for my blog, because there is the added opportunity to sprinkle some Svelte component inside the markdown, which is something very, very cool. And that actually, like, obviously, MDSVEX is a big project, but at the end of the day, it's just a preprocessor. So it's just actually something that Svelte allows you to do. So we've seen preprocessor in the last episode, but basically, like, a preprocessor allows you to put some code to modify the Svelte component before it gets fed to the Svelte compiler, and this allows to really do something like magical. Like, you can add syntax, you can add something. Like, for example, MeltUI has a preprocessor to allow you to write less code for MeltUI. MDSVEX is a preprocessor that takes your code and, like, your markdown code and convert it in a Svelte component. So it's very, very cool. And again,
I think that's
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's why one size fits all is so tough, and I realize that because so for our sites we have millions of articles, so it's quite hard for us, for example, to do any kind of static generation, because there's just too much content. It would take like a whole day to deploy a new version of a site, and they want to deploy every 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends on what kind of like projects you're working on, if it's useful with markdown and static site generation.
Yeah, I mean, as I guess, like, this is something that we can see, like, for every question related to tech. Like, it depends. Like, there's no one size fit all for probably anything, apart for the fact that Svelte is awesome.
Yes, if you want to become senior engineer, just answer everything with "it depends."
Yeah, I agree.
No umbrella statements here. Yeah, for sure. That was good, keeping me honest there with there are no umbrella statements when it comes to any tech decision. I like how headless CMSs, whether it's custom made or off the shelf, it really changes the decision you make based on the user, like thinking from the user first. If the user is doing journalism and you have hundreds of components to choose from, then a block-based headless CMS is a good approach, because they can pick and choose what sort of content blocks they wish to have, and everything is immediate to the user. There's no deployments, there's just fetching and caching.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, like, I'm seeing a comment from Scene, which say that he migrated away from using a markdown / MDSVEX for his component, because, I mean, there are trade-offs. For example, there's no type checking, there's no prettier formatting, some error can become confusing. There are no quick fix, like, for example, no quick import, because at the end of the day, you are writing a SVX file, not a Svelte file. So there are definitely trade-offs. But I mean, it really depends, because again, if you are writing a super content-heavy website, you might not need import, you might not need type checking, you might not need formatting.
If you say it depends one more time, I'm gonna have to promote you to architect.
I mean, I would say it, but it depends. It depends your way to CEO of anything. Okay, let's move on to this week in Q&A with some question and hopefully some answers. And the first question that comes from Enrico itself, which is how to make variables react to form action resets. So I think we can see the demo here.
Pull up the demo. And one of the questions I saw in Discord recently was about this Svelte Lab reproduction. It was about how do you reset a form. So you'll see on the right, there are two form inputs, one that says pre for prefix, and then there's a second input to the right of that. Enter something in the right, anything you want, and then you'll see the button to submit will no longer be disabled. Click on the button, and then the form will reset. And the reason it resets correctly is due to some fix I added. So scroll up in page.svelte. And I want to explain the nuance a bit. So on line 15, 16, 17, what I'm doing is in the form, I am passing in use enhance. The default behavior of use enhance in SvelteKit is to reset the page. And one of the quirks that is not well known is this will not change variables with two-way binding. On line 24 and 25, we have two inputs. Both of them are using bind value. And the variables for bind value is prefix, which is defined on line 3, and some text defined on line 4. Some text is instantiated as an empty string, but when the form resets, things will happen. And to show us, Paolo, can you delete the use enhance override and just use plain use enhance? You can always undo when we're done. Yeah,
Yes.
delete that and fill in the form and submit it, and we'll show you the default behavior. Click the button.
Ooh.
So things are different now. The form resets completely, but if you were to console log some text, it'll actually still contain the value that was submitted. It will not be an empty string. So it's kind of breaking the mental model of Svelte a little bit because the two-way binding won't work as expected. But the use enhance function is working as expected. It is resetting the page. But with the override I added, now you can Command Z and bring back the override. The workaround is on line 18, I have to manually set some text to an empty string on line 18. And on line 17, I manually call the enhance update with the option reset false. Reset false will not do resets when you are progressively enhanced.
Okay.
And there you have it.
That's really, really cool. So, I mean, this is something that I think it's actually something that like you can stumble upon these and this will really probably like mess my mind. So thank you for sharing, Enrico, because if I ever come up with if I ever find something like this, I will probably use your workaround. There's also a related issue that I think, here's this one. So the default behavior, this is Simon, which is the red team guy, is to reset the field to be in conformance with how full page reload will work. In your case, however, you are resetting the content through the binding, which works on a full page reload, but not when using use enhance, because it empties, not knowing about the two-way bindings.
Yeah, and another disclaimer, the Svelte Lab demo is not complete. Of course, I would not ship a form that with a disabled submit button by default, because if you want to support users who have broken JavaScript, such as network issues, it's always good to have buttons that can be submittable, not be disabled until JavaScript is loaded.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's it for this Q&A. If anyone wants to ask for follow-ups, go ahead. Yeah, exactly. So on mount, you can disable it instead of what I had there previously.
Yes. I don't know if someone has some question on these. Otherwise, we can move to another question, which is how to dynamically apply CSS to a page when values provided by the server. So let's look at these example. I will move over there. So
cool. Zoom in a couple.
Sorry?
Zoom in a couple increments.
Okay. Sorry guys, because I can never to me is gigantic, but I guess okay.
It's got to be extra big. So yeah, go ahead if you like.
I can zoom in even more. Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to break down a couple of methodologies for server or loading CSS values from the server and rendering it on the page. And Paolo will also have a demonstration related to Tailwind and using inline styles.
Yes.
So what I have here is a Svelte REPL, not using SvelteKit at the moment. And you can imagine line 5, you have CSS variables loaded by your server. So this is just a demo, but imagine line 5 contains an object provided by your server or your server load. What I'm doing on this page is on line 11 and 12, I am generating a inline style sheet. And on line 16, I'm rendering that style sheet. Line 12 is a variable called CSS, and it says it's like literally HTML. It is style, and then there's the root selector, and then it's inlining all of the variables broken down by line 5, which is the object of CSS variables I want. Further down the page in the style tag. We have h1, the color is body, and line 26, the background color is the background. I don't have any fallbacks. This is an incomplete demo, but you can see the heading has a background color of blue and a text color of white, which means it's correctly loaded the CSS that I had server loaded. And this should work with server-side rendering as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Paolo, there's other ways to dynamically load server
Yeah.
CSS, isn't there?
Yes, I will show you these. This is a very basic SvelteLab. Oh, I actually copied the wrong URL, but we can quickly fix it. So this is a SvelteLab REPL with Tailwind. So we actually, like you can see that we have Tailwind here, right? And this is actually a way to specify whichever, like in this case, the text is being set like these are not Tailwind color, because you can specify, for example, text red 500, and this will actually give you a red provided by Tailwind. But sometimes we might, as Enrico said, like we might have some color that comes from the server. And so given that in Tailwind you can do these, like FF3E00, like one might say, okay, I can just inline these and use the color from my server. So let's return the color here. And we will return this FF3E00, which I don't know if any of you remember, like resemble these, but this is the Svelte color. Like I know it by heart. So we fix these with a simple hello world. And now we want to use this data, which are passing in data.color. So one thing that you may think is that, okay, I can just go here and do this and use data.color. I need obviously to use, I can actually avoid using these because we are in Svelte. So this will actually work, but I think if I refresh, it should not work. It's working. Okay. Surprise! I don't know why it's working.
My code is working.
I don't know why this is working, because like the reason why this should not work is because while this gets resolved to text FF300, Tailwind will not include this class inside the bundle if this is not statically analyzed. So basically, yeah, okay, it's working only in dev, so we can actually build pm run build. Let's do npm. So if we build these, like while this is actually using the color, like probably like maybe the only reason why this is working is because like Tailwind can actually analyze. I don't know if this smart can actually analyze that these will be the variable that is returned here. I don't know if it's this smart.
I get the point. It's because Tailwind is using post CSS to purge unused classes. I don't use Tailwind, but I get the idea of it purging values.
Not only that, but also like Tailwind, it's only including the actual classes that it finds. Like it literally find all the classes that are Tailwind classes in your content, and it includes only that. Yeah, it was a matter of cache. So this is not working, right? Because despite it being this class name, is not working. So how can you make this work? One thing that you could do is actually literally go and do like if color, like if you mention your class inside your code, it will work. But in this case, what you can do is you can literally use the platform and tell Tailwind to use a CSS variable. So BG, for example, color. So now Tailwind will actually use this. So if we go and see, you can see that it creates a class with color var text color. There is this dark reader, which is probably my arc that is doing something. But like it's literally adding a CSS variable. So how to fix this? We can use Svelte and do class style colon dash dash color. It's equal to, and whatever things you pass in will become a CSS variable. So if I pass red, it will become red. But now I can pass data.color and it will actually work. And the reason why this is working is because he's actually using the CSS variable, and then it's Svelte that is actually setting the CSS variable with the data.color. So this is a way that in Svelte you can actually use the platform and CSS variable, which by the way are very, very cool. And you can use them with Tailwind to actually get dynamic color in your Tailwind classes.
Yeah, that's super cool. I like the style colon dash dash CSS variable name. That is a built-in Svelte feature. And even if you're not using Tailwind, it's a great way to pass in server rendered CSS variables to customize your components or your elements.
Absolutely. And as Chirila is saying, I use Arc, by the way. Okay, so I think that's it for this week in Svelte. Unless some of you have questions or comments or something else, whatever. Always remember that, like here at This Week in Svelte, we are very welcoming. So if you want to speak, you can raise your hand. If you want to speak, if you want to present something that you are working on, a project, a library, even just a website, you can contact us, and you will be featured in the next. I can speak in the next This Week in Svelte.
Yeah. Addressing comments, Mohammed says, what if you remove style? I suppose it'll just use whatever fallback color your browser has, which is the default, if you don't have the style defined. And Cyrilla mentioned yet another way you can dynamically generate server-rendered CSS that I wish I could have prepared on time, but a really cool idea is a SvelteKit endpoint that generates a CSS file.
This is very cool. Actually, I think we can make it very quickly. Well, let's do it. Create
Paolo's up for the challenge.
Create root. We can create a server.js. And actually, let's create it in something. Create root, servers, CSS. So
what is this feature?
This is to create a root in SvelteLab. So
wow, this is so cool. I had no idea you could do this.
Yeah, we have a lot of niceties in SvelteLab. So we can create my custom
style.css.
Yeah. So this is the server.
Wow.
And we can return a response, which I think you need. You can just return these, and you can return a status of 200. I don't know if I can remember if this is the correct way, but basically you can return CSS from here. So if we do like these, can do, I don't know,
style tag.
Because
it's actually, a CSS file,
this
right?
This is actually a CSS file. So we can do root, and we can do var color, which is color. And if we have color here, that color, which is F3E00.
And you need content type headers. Which one? Not JSON.
I don't know, because I think by default, like if we try to go to
the MIME types just might work. We'll see.
Yeah, it should just work. Style.css. You actually get this. Yes.
Let's try with the link on SvelteHead.
Let's go ahead. Oh. If we go in page.svelte, we can create a SvelteHead. SvelteHead, and we can add link rel equals style sheet, link href, right?
href, yeah.
And it's my custom style.css. So this should be loading, and if we remove these, it should still be no. Let's see.
Okay. There might be network errors due to the content type. Let's check a look at the DevTools.
Network. Let's reload. My custom style.css. No, it's actually CSS. Maybe I'm botching something.
Oh, did you see I missed it?
Yeah, in the network there is my custom style CSS, which is a style.
I'm looking for the
content
MIME
type text
type.
plain.
Okay.
And actually, like this is.
Oh, it says text plain. That's not good. So it's got to be
Oh.
text CSS.
So this will not work by. So I think I can header.
I believe it's headers plural.
Headers, yeah.
Yeah,
And,
headers.
an object.
Content type, I guess.
Yeah.
Text CSS. Yes.
Whoa!
Enrico was right.
Well, actually, the
Amazing.
Discord commenters were right. Thank you for that.
Red. Oh yeah, obviously dash red will not work. Very, very
Change the
cool.
color to blue.
Blue.
Make it pink.
Pink.
It works.
Now you can control the colors from your CMS, for example. From a headless
Yes.
CMS.
Badass.
Wow, you can load an entire theme file or a whole CSS file based
Yes.
on other things. You can have instead of a Svelte component library, you can have a HTML component library and just load the appropriate style sheets or concatenate them.
Yes. I mean, let's go really, really crazy because we can go URL, we can get search params, and we can get the color, const color, it's equal to search params dot get color or red. And then we can do page.svelte, and we can literally do color equal pink.
Hopefully that doesn't lead to security issues.
I mean, you can go really, really crazy with these things.
You're
Nice.
very
Thank you,
brave for
Sorella.
live coding, Paolo.
Oh, this doesn't.
That's what Paolo does for a living, live coding, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do live coding on a daily basis. Okay, that's it for today. And thank you everyone to joining in, and I will see you next week.